Hello, everyone. My name is Halme-Tuomisaari, and I'm Associate Professor in Human Rights Studies at Lund University. I am sharing this video today to offer you some tips on how to hold a good presentation. I initially gave this presentation at the doctoral seminar in Human Rights and Minority Studies at Åbo Akademi, but I thought that it contained some insights that might be useful also for others. Let me share my screen and we'll get started with this 20-minute presentation. The reason for this presentation is quite simple. There is an expectation for doctoral students and others to hold presentations, yet very seldom do we tell you how it's actually done. And in this presentation, I want to share some very practical, some slightly more complicated tips on how this is done. And my hope is that these tips will facilitate preparations for your future presentations. Let's get going. So the first tip that I have is really quite simple. Keep calm. Now, what I mean by this is that holding a presentation, especially when you're starting out in your academic path, is a new thing. And therefore, it's totally understandable that it's something that may make you feel quite nervous. And I want to suggest that this nervousness is actually perfectly both understandable, and it can also be a good thing. Why? Well, if you think about what nervousness means, it communicates, of course, that you are doing something new that you may not know quite how it's done, but it's also something, so I like to think, that communicates to you that you are doing something that is important to you. You are doing something that matters. And I want to suggest that this sense of nervousness can become a tool to facilitate your presentations when you find the right way to embrace it. If you read this nervousness as something that's a positive energy that it gives you that extra spark that allows you to focus on what you're doing, then it can indeed become a boost that offers your presentation an additional quality that makes it also more engaging to your audience. And there's the wrong kind of nervousness, and I will talk of that a bit as this presentation progresses. And I think it's that kind of nervousness that just paralyzes you, that you will want to stay away from. And I will try to give you tips on how to do that. Think of the nervousness as something that you can lean on. Try not to you don't necessarily even need to hide it. It's perfectly okay to start your presentation by saying, okay, I'm feeling quite nervous. And most people who are the nice people in academia, they will understand, and that way already make it feel easier. Tip number 2 that I have is warm up. And this tip comes from this idea that you should really, and we should all really approach presentations as a type of performance. So what would you do if you were performing in any other genre? If you were to sing, if you were to play an instrument, if you were to recite a poem, if you were to appear in a play, whatever form of performance you may have previous experience on. Well, we of course then know that one doesn't simply just run on stage. There are a certain number of things that one does to prepare. One of them is to find the mental space to keep calm. So I want to suggest that holding academic presentations is very much a performance that we want to prepare for. So think about how you best prepare. Do you have some kind of routines, things that you can do that will facilitate you in finding that right mental space? Most concretely, academic presentations, they are a performance because quite simply you will be speaking and others will be listening. So in that way, you are in the role of a performer who will hold that space with your own voice and your presentation. Think about what you need in order to feel prepared for that, so warm up. Tip number 3, structure. And I cannot emphasize this point enough. Think about this if you had an elaborate evening gown on. Most of the things that keep it glamorous and very well supported are invisible. So there's the structure underneath it. I realize this metaphor may not work for everyone, but for those of you who it does, I hope that this helps. So first, when you start to prepare your presentation, think of what are the main points that you want to share. Think of concrete, clean bullet points, if you'd like, which can be very, very helpful. Start with simplified ideas of what it is that you want to say, and think of one coherent story. Keep everything that you want to share nicely packed and tight. You do not have time in 20 minutes to go wandering around in different places. So think of how you want to structure it. And usually I would say one coherent story and maybe 3 points that you elaborate is pretty much what you can fit in a 20-minute presentation. And that takes me to my next tip, which is to simplify. Now, especially when one is starting out, there is, of course, this feeling like, how do I show that I know enough? Am I expert enough to hold this presentation? And it may come as a surprise or maybe not, but this is a feeling that we never fully leave behind us when we are engaging in academics. This notion of the imposter syndrome can stay with very, very senior academics. And for me, I wondered whether that's really alarming or not, but actually I've concluded that it's not. It shows that working in academia, working with creative scholarly content is something where we are continually pushing ourselves off of our comfort zone, and hence we are experiencing these feelings of nervousness, which may then embody themselves in the form of an imposter syndrome. In order to convince your audience that you know what you're talking of, try to avoid the temptation of just adding more and more detail, becoming more and more elaborate. Try to avoid the temptation of hiding behind an infinite number of footnotes. What you actually need to do is to keep your point simpler rather than more complex. Think of Coco Chanel, another metaphor or another way of thinking that may not work for everyone, but I think for some of you. What she used to say, and of course she's this ultimate style icon, is that when you leave the house, keep it simple, remove one item of clothing. It can be a scarf, it can be a brooch, it can be a hat. Take something off to simplify the entity. And I think that applies very much to an academic presentation. Keep it simple, and when you are done with the entity, go over each detail and think, is there something that I can take off rather than add on, which will allow for my overall point to come across clearer? And why do you really need to do this in addition to keeping your audience with you? Well, because you do not have a lot of time. I cannot emphasize enough on the importance of timing your presentations and sticking to the script that you have. I think you maybe already have experienced this, but all of us will experience this in academia when you see someone who starts out and they first go and then they get wrapped in this fascination about what it is that they actually study, and they feel like they need to introduce themselves. So they start doing that quite slowly, and they find themselves going to all kinds of detours and side alleys and adding a bit of detail on this, and then my project went there. Then they move on after around 3 to 5 minutes has already passed of this precious 20-minute slot. Then they move on to describe the background of their paper, and they again start to describe everything in terms of how the discussion has developed, what kind of research exists, what kind of sources can they use. And this, of course, is really fascinating stuff. The only problem is that this usually can take too long. And what you may then have is that usually the chair of a session will have these 5-minute, 3-minute, 1-minute notes or signs that they show the speaker. You may witness this horrible moment when the speaker is given this 5-minute warning and they start to panic and they're like, oh my God, I have barely gotten started with what it is that I want to say. I've only scratched the surface and now almost all of my time is gone. And you see them frantically shuffling papers and trying to race to the end. And what you end up with is a very rushed, a slightly incoherent attempt to summarize both what the paper was supposed to be about and then the conclusions, with the person just running manically ahead. And the end result may be a rather a shocking moment for everyone when the presenter knows that this did not go well and the audience feel desperate because there's nothing they can do to help. So do yourself a favor and take the time that you have seriously. And the one thing, no matter where your path takes you in life after you finish your PhD, one thing is for sure, you will always benefit from the ability to hold a nicely constructed and well-timed 20-minute presentation. And some things that can help you in keeping time is to visualize. So use visual aids to support your overall message. I think PowerPoint really should be thought of as a visual tool. And I'm, of course, taking it to the extreme here where I only have individual words. This does not need to be quite this simplified. However, I've also done this here to highlight that it is more effective to show less rather than have full slides that are absolutely filled with text. You also want to have as little text as possible so that you can engage with the audience. So ideally, the beauty of the presentation is that you have an opportunity to engage with the audience, and you can have the privilege of having eye contact and then kind of bounce off on their reactions and really create this moment when there's an interaction, a communication between you and your audience. And keeping your slides simple can really help you there. Also, remember that an image says 1,000 words. And usually I find images just online. You can use them quite freely when you are only doing it for a presentation. And also something else I do, the layout that I have for my presentation, this is simply a template that's offered by PowerPoint or whatever else other program you may be using. I think these are quite fun. So usually I like to take advantage of them as well. However, remember, no gadgets. And I'm using gadgets here in an expansive sense, meaning everything that can possibly go wrong. And this includes gadgets in my description, include things such as videos and audio files. Now, again, this is something that you may have already experienced, but you will see this when you proceed in your academic path, that a scholar has prepared a really nice presentation and they want to add a video file on it. And then you see them there in the front and everything has worked perfectly well when they've tested things out in advance, but for some reason the video refuses to work. Whether it's because the online connection is not fast enough, or whether it's because they are showing their presentation from a computer in a conference room, a seminar room, and somehow the computer insists on opening it in a different window and it gets buried somewhere. Or maybe the audio is not working because there needs to be an external mic. And then what you end up with is this moment of, again, slight panic, like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? It's not working. Maybe someone goes in to get the tech person. By that time, again, 3/4 of the presentation time it has vanished and the person is left with this feeling like, what am I going to do? So I actually suggest, all of this stuff, of course, makes you more nervous, and not the good kind of nervous, the wrong kind of nervous. So I suggest keeping it quite simple. So just sticking, this is my advice, sticking with your PowerPoint slides, nice images, and then just talking. And there you minimize everything that can go wrong. Then next, a tip that is a bit out of the box of what usually gets discussed in academia. We don't usually, as said, we don't talk of academic presentations as performance, and we definitely don't talk about, well, what would you wear for that presentation or performance? However, this is actually a surprisingly important part of academia. And whether you're teaching, whether you're in an expert capacity holding another kind of a talk, for example, if you're appearing for a government committee of some kind, whether you are at an academic conference, or whatever the role is when you are there as a performer, you also need to think of, so how does this performer dress? How does the academic, the expert that you are, what does that person look like? And I think that here it's really these moments when you can transition from a student into the expert that you are aspiring to become. And one part of that is to dress the part. Now, thinking of very, very concrete things, when you are holding a presentation, maybe you will start to engage in some hand gestures. Maybe you find yourself feeling that you need to walk around a little bit. Maybe you sit down and you get up again. Whatever you do, the last thing you want and should be doing is to think about your clothing. So even ladies on occasion may perspire when things get really exciting. Think about choosing a garment that will very, very conveniently hide that. Think about something that's light enough. There's usually a bit of adrenaline flowing, which again is the good kind of nervousness. So think about something that allows you to stay nice and cool while you are holding your talk. Think about it if you were an athlete and you'd go and run a 10K race, you would need to be dressed appropriately. Think of exactly the same thing when you are working as an academic. So what does the expert that you aspire to become look like? And what is the attire in which you will feel comfortable holding a performance known as an academic presentation in front of an audience? And it actually does pay off to think about this a little bit in advance, because it may be something quite different than what you thought would work. And again, the last thing you want to do is to start realize, oh my gosh, I'm perspiring now and it's showing and I need to just hide my hands and I'm feeling so awkward and I'm afraid this button is going to pop and I don't know if my skirt is riding up or my pants are too tight. Find an outfit that works and you can forget about these sentiments. And to do that, rehearse, just as you would for any other kind of performance. You rehearse it. Start by choosing your outfit, getting it on, then timing yourself after you have prepared your presentation. You can do what I'm doing now, record it. You can also create an audio file. If you choose, decide whether you want to write your paper out or, like I've done here, I just have these notes and I'm actually sort of just speaking from them. In any event, rehearse and make sure that you're timing yourself well. As a general rule, the more you wish to say, the better chance you have of having the time to say it all if you write things down. And that's something that I've actually come to terms as my academic path has progressed. So the more points you wish to make, the better of an idea it may be to write it all down. However, there's no need. If you feel like you work better in this moment of really getting into the performance with the nice, right kind of nervousness and you want to speak it through, then stick to that. But learn that also by rehearsing. It's absolutely fine to record yourself and listen to it afterward. Many of us are doing this in a language that's not our native tongue. English is not my mother tongue either. So what you can consequently do is to record yourself and listen. Is your pronunciation clear? Is there something that you could do to make yourself become more intelligible? Can you find better ways to say certain words? So concretely rehearse all this. And the final tip that I have is that you remember to enjoy holding presentations. Again, this is not something that we often talk of in academia, but if you really think about it, this is a unique opportunity. You get to speak of something of which you are passionate, something that is so fascinating and interesting to you that you are spending a good portion of time focusing on it. You are creating something original when you are finding your data and when you are engaging in analysis and bringing it into academic discussion. You are doing that for people, with people who share an interest in academic endeavors. And by embracing this mentality, that may also help you to find the space to move away from the wrong kind of nervousness, where you feel like you are only doing this to be criticized. So you see this sea of eyes, sea of faces, and all you can think, oh my God, are they all criticizing me? Am I good enough? Am I good enough of an expert to be here? When you are able to shift that mental space into thinking that there's a space of shared reflection, and you are inviting your listeners in for a moment of shared reflection, it's this fascination that connects you. This is another way in which you can tap into the right kind of nervousness and really to find an enjoyment over holding presentations. If you do not have the routine to perform, try to find a way to get some routine. Join an arts club or do whatever else you can think of to get experience holding presentations and doing performances also outside academia. But remember that this is a unique opportunity that you have. And with that, I wish you good luck. I hope your presentations go well. Buses don't run late, you make it on time in the venue and everything works and you are feeling that you are in a good place when you're holding your presentations. And I wish you many enjoyable presentations in your academic path. I hope that these tips have been useful.